Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass, and today we're making a professional chiropractor connection out in Canada with Dr. James Chestnut. James, can you do you hear me?
No, you froze there for about 5 seconds. I don't know why.
Okay, all I was saying was that I was wondering if you could just get us started by just introducing yourself and reflecting on
Sure.
what it was that attracted you to becoming a chiropractor.
Okay, well, my name's Dr. James Chestnut. Boy, way back when, what got me into chiropractic was actually I was doing a master's degree in exercise physiology, neural adaptation, and I got hurt very badly playing rugby. I was on a rugby scholarship as well, and couldn't get any help, to be honest. And the guy who was one of my on my committee for my master's thesis was also the sports med doc for the Canadian Olympic team, and he was telling me, don't go to chiropractor, don't go to chiropractor. So I got referrals to the neurologist, everybody you could imagine. I got to the front of the line and got the sort of Golden Glove, you know, um, varsity athlete treatment, and to no avail, unfortunately. And so eventually it was actually a physical therapist who said to me, it was a good buddy of mine. We trained together quite a bit. And he said, man, go to a chiropractor. You need a chiropractor. And I said, okay, I trusted the guy. And so I went, and it was incredible change. I had a rib problem. I had lost all the strength in my arm. My neck was brutal. I mean, it was awful. So anyway, yeah. And then I was really sort of intrigued by it. I had been accepted to do a PhD looking at um, preventing falls in the elderly, looking at proprioception for balance. And I had done a fair bit of work on the neurological side of training, and I realized it was all neurological. And so I had these great hopes to change the world because I knew that, about 50% of elderly who fall die within a year. And it's a huge issue. It's a huge expense. It's terrible for the elderly to go through it. Um, anyway, so I had done a fair bit of work on that, and I had shopped around about where I was going to do a PhD, and ended up, had a great fellowship going. Was going to get paid to go and teach, and um, I I actually I plan ahead for everything. So I had already envisioned my huge clinic that I was going to have. I didn't probably think of the term clinic at the time, but a huge center where I would bring the elderly in, and I would get them to exercise, um, very specific types of exercises. Although any type of exercise is amazing, to be honest, it doesn't have to be very specific. But I knew I was going to teach them things about strength and balance, strength, agility, balance, and I knew that I could prevent the vast majority of falls for people, and I knew nobody else was doing it. And so my question was, maybe someone else brought out to me, well, how am I going to get paid? So I called what's called the medical services plan in British Columbia. And I said, listen, here's who I am. Here's what I'm about to do. I can pretty much guarantee you that when I'm done my PhD, I will have literally written, the landmark sort of guide to how to deal with this enormous issue in terms of preventing it and caring for people. And I said, I'm just wondering, how do I get paid? And she said, you can't get paid. I said, what do you mean? I'll have all the evidence. She goes, oh no, it's not whether or not you have the evidence. It's not whether or not what you do works best. It's whether or not you are approved to get paid by the medical services plan. And that's basically run by medical doctors. And they let very few people in. And the ones they let in, like chiropractors and physical therapists, whatever, they really dominate and monopolize how much they can get paid, what they get paid for. And you will, unless you're a practitioner that's approved, you cannot get paid, no matter how much you can prove that you're helping people. Um, we won't do it. And I said, but nobody's doing this. No one knows how to do this. There's no medical doctor doing this, and they can't even bill for it either. She said, I'm sorry. That's just the way it goes. It was just an incredible eye opener for me. So I veered off from doing a PhD, and I thought, well, geez, I've had such a great experience with chiropractic. I mean, life changing. Although I will say, the explanation I got from the chiropractor about why it was working was a bit off, and because I was literally at the time immersed in neurology, because I was doing a master's degree with a specialization in neural adaptation training. That kind of put me off a little bit, but anyway, but the results were fantastic. And then I actually was kind of humming and hawing about, because chiropractic still had this kind of weird reputation. I spoke to a few people, PhDs, where, I was doing my master's, and no one really seemed to have a super high opinion of chiropractic, which didn't deter me. I was stubborn then, as I am now. So I started looking into it, and I came across the Manga report. And when I saw and read the Manga report, it was hands down very clear to me that chiropractic was the most evidence-based option available for people dealing with back problems. And I also knew I wanted to do lifestyle and exercise stuff. And then I realized I could bill. And so chiropractic was a perfect fit for me. I did look into physical therapy a little bit, but interestingly, I was going to do a PhD because what I discovered was all these specialized exercise programs that they were using in physical therapy and sometimes using chiropractic had no evidence. And so what I wanted to do was do a thorough sort of review and as my PhD and talk about the fact that, hey, there's no evidence for any of these things that you're doing. Let's find out what is evidence-based. But I guess shouldn't have been a surprise, but what was a surprise was they really didn't like the fact that I was telling them that the exercise programs that they were utilizing as gold standard had no evidence. So that was kind of an interesting experience as well. So that's the long answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. Well, two parts to this question. One is you having that background in having a master's program that you were coming out of and going into chiropractic program, like how that influenced your pathway that you took through your chiropractic educational experience, but also like you having an ambition to bring like landmark, sort of comprehensive guides on this is the gold standard to do something. Where did that inspiration come from? Because whether you took the route to become a PhD and create this guide for the elderly to improve their balance and proprioception, or whether you went the chiropractic route, it sounds like you already had that inherently built into like what you wanted to eventually bring to the world. Like, where did that ambition come from? What was your upbringing like that really primed you to be thinking this way?
Well, my father's a PhD biologist, so I'm sure that had a fair influence on me. My mother's very logical person. I grew up on a little hobby farm, so we were always very naturally, we sort of had the biological paradigm. We didn't take a lot of pills at home or do any of those kind of things really. And when I was doing my graduate work, well, I mean, when you're learning about physiology, because I did that even in my undergrad, some work in my undergrad in physical education and kinesiology kind of stuff. Science always spoke to me. I just liked it. I'm a very left brain logical person. And so I had some really good teachers who demanded evidence for everything, especially my graduate work. You always had to cite a paper for in our small group classes for my graduate work. And then as I went through research methodology and statistics, the whole concept of just the importance of being able to have evidence for your opinion became enormously important to me. And I just resonated with it. It just was something I felt comfortable with because I just wasn't a dogmatic person. And I loved the idea that I now had the tool set to actually find out what was true and what wasn't. Now, I drove a lot of people crazy because they set me loose in the world. And so I questioned everything, everything. And what you realize when you question everything is that there's not much that is evidence-based. Not much. And so, some people like that, some people don't. But for me, it became a mission, was to become a patient advocate. And the best way to do that was to do it through valid evidence. What gives patients, what intervention gives the best statistical chance to get and keep a patient well. And so I just honestly like it. I just have always enjoyed it. I read research every day. It's kind of like being half a lawyer, half a scientist, because you're trying to make a case, right? You're trying to make a case for what is the best intervention. You're not starting off with an intervention and trying to prove it. You're starting with a blank slate saying, I have to look at all of this stuff and find out what has the best evidence. And then I have to start questioning that to make sure that I don't have a bias. Like, am I comfortable with it? I have to question myself. So it's kind of half lawyer, half scientist. And I get to apply both logic and evidence and science to it. And I guess it's a hobby. Really, it's I do what I love. I do enjoy it.
I'm curious what kinds of questions you would offer to students entering chiropractic education to like really begin with of how do they investigate these types of questions within the context of chiropractic education, which it's about a 3 to 4 year program. With my question, which is what happens when we add pre-chiropractic into the mix and extend the runway and make that educational process 3 to 4 years longer.
Mhm.
Now we're talking 7, 8 years that they have to really develop their stuff, that whatever that stuff is, their science, their inquiry into certain subject matters. I'm just curious how you go about, what's that thought process like of going about like entering into chiropractic education today? What are some questions they should be asking of themselves? What are some maybe prompts that you could give them to develop questions for themselves, like you do for yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I honestly think that paradigm is the most important thing, right? Which is to understand, like, what's so fantastic about chiropractic is our paradigm. The fact that we understand that humans are part of the are a biological mammalian species, that we have to that the laws that govern all of biology govern us, so that we're not innately sick. We're not sick with chronic illness because of bad genes or an inability to regulate our own blood pressure or blood sugar or body weight or moods. That we wouldn't, in the history of species on Earth that have gone extinct or become endangered, we've never in biology ever blamed bad genes. We never see an animal species become sick and think that it's because there's something inherently defective within the animal species. We always know it's environment. Always. No exceptions in history of biology. So maybe because my dad's a biologist, or maybe because I grew up in a very natural way, I applied that paradigm to human health, which was and still is quite unique. But when you do that, because it's not just about understanding science, it's about understanding science and human health through the proper lens, because there's so much misinformation out there in science. Um, so what I would say is, find out what is required. Why are humans so sick? Right? That's the most important thing you can figure out, is why are humans so sick? And you have to decide whether is it the prevailing garbage explanation that's put out there, which is that humans are sick because they have defective genes, or they have a defective innate ability to self-regulate. Is it bad luck? Or is it because we created a habitat, and we make lifestyle choices within that habitat that are incongruent with our biological genome determined needs to express healthy structure and function? So once you realize that the chiropractic paradigm is correct, that we are self-healing and self-regulating, obviously with limits, that we need to address the cause rather than treat effects. Once you get that paradigm correct, and then you start looking at the literature, it becomes quite clear quite early that the current that the medical system, the medical paradigm, has no chance at dealing with this chronic illness pandemic. They have nothing to prevent it. They have nothing to cure any of it. They're just throwing drugs at a problem that's caused by poor lifestyle. They're throwing drugs at a problem that's caused by lack of motion and proper neurological communication between the body and the brain. In terms of, even if you just look at back pain, like everything they do um, has an enormous amount of studies and no valid evidence. And that's probably a hard thing to hear for people who aren't as immersed into this as they might be. It's probably shocking, but that's the key, is just to ask yourself, why are humans sick? And if you understand that humans are sick because of how we live, how we eat, move, and think, and you realize that no pill will ever fix a problem caused by improper nutrition, or a lack of exercise, or a lack of social connection, or self-esteem, or self-love, or gratitude. Once you realize that's true, then you can start pursuing answers to the questions: why are we so sick? What is required to get well? And then understand your place in the world as a chiropractor and how enormously important that is. Um, and I think that's a big part of it. Otherwise, you're always going to feel inferior as a chiropractor, because you're going to be judging yourself against trying to deal with an emergency. Someone's had a heart attack. What's the chiropractor going to do? Or but or trying to deal with a lifestyle illness. Someone's obese. Is a chiropractic adjustment going to fix that? No, but can a chiropractic adjustment change an awful lot of that physiology to allow it easier for them to exercise and even alter mood? And because we know what movement does, yeah, absolutely. But we're not in 1895 anymore. So if you're not willing to address some very basic, very simple things in terms of lifestyle, you're going to struggle trying to get really sick people well, with chiropractic alone. I'm not saying that you become a counselor in your office. I'm not saying that you even have to become a lifestyle practitioner. But if you don't tell these people that how they're living is having a tremendous impact on not only how sick they are, and not only the health of their current health of their spine, but on their opportunities to get and stay better, their lifestyle has a huge impact on it. And if you don't say that and are truthful about it to yourself and to others as a chiropractor, people tend to put an unreal expectation on the chiropractic adjustment. And so when people get a couple adjustments and somehow, this obese, sedentary, pro-inflamed, junk food eating, beer swilling person isn't better in 3 visits, they think chiropractic didn't work. And that is a tragedy to me. So I think
we could keep going down this path. Let me just kind of guide or direct how we can go from
sure.
jumping off from these different premises and these different
Sure.
questions that you've proposed that students take in, ponder, and consider for themselves. Let's just look at a campus environment, whether it's a chiropractic campus or a college campus. Some of the things that I've heard you say is terms like allostatic load and how our environment influences our physiology, and terms like chiropractors are like more the plumbers and the electricians, and medicine is more like the firefighters. I mean, these different relatable rocks in the backpack, these different relatable analogies that take these newer scientific terms and bring them into sort of an understandable context, and also the context, right? So that's kind of what I'm wanting to lead this conversation into, is
Sure.
like, if we're talking to a high school or a college student and they're looking around them and they're like, these are the stressors I have academically, and then these are also the stressors I have extracurricularly, whether it's social or family, or I don't know what I want to do with my life. I guess I'm curious, is like, there's 2 or 3 different directions I would love for you to go, but one is like, how do you approach a challenge as like making it a project and really deconstructing it and teasing out as many details so that you can approach it from as comprehensive and holistic in a standpoint, like as one of these students? And then also, like, how do you integrate your knowledge into like how you approach, say, a new population, like a pre-chiropractic population that finds themselves in an extremely toxic environment around classmates that are not making good lifestyle choices. Maybe they're not making good lifestyle choices. They hear you and they want to start to not only live differently, but also support and promote this lifestyle on their college campuses. You kind of see where I'm going with this? I'm just throwing it back to you.
Yeah. So let me start with how I approach any problem, or how to create a solution, right? That's the first thing, is I don't focus on problems. I focus on solutions. And then I identify what I want. I go through it in a very scientific way. And I actually outline this in my late public book, Live Right for Your Species Type, because I think it's so important for every human being to understand this, right? Is that whatever your goal is, whatever you want, there are variables that determine that outcome, right? Always. We live in a cause and effect universe. So it doesn't matter what you want. There are things that determine it. There are causes to that effect. Anything you want is an effect. And then there are 2 categories of variables. One are the ones outside of our control. So we should never waste a moment on those. And the other ones are everything within our control. The biggest one, of course, is the one we see in the mirror every day, right? That's the biggest thing determining everything, is our own behavior choices, our own thought choices, our own attitude choices. And so once I've identified the variables that determine the outcome I want that are within my control, I then create an action plan so that I can actually influence those variables towards producing the outcome I want. And that's how I go about everything in life. Doesn't matter if I want to be a good dad, good husband, a good student, a good teacher, a good doctor, have a good financial life, it doesn't matter. The first step to everything is identifying what the goal is. Then you have to identify the variables that determine that goal. Some that might be outside your control, let them go. Focus the ones that are in your control and go to work. But most importantly, the thing to work on is self. Right? Without self-control, without the ability to have the proper knowledge and reasoning ability, proper moral base, to determine, because we all know what's right or wrong. And so when you're doing things that are wrong, that's incredibly stressful for you, really stressful. And so, the first thing we have to do is develop a foundation of how to make our own selves have more self-control in our own lives. And then when we deal with that, there's really nothing we can't accomplish, right? The only reason we don't accomplish things is, for the most part, lack of self-control, right? Lack of the ability to do what we know we should for long enough to get the result we want. So if you see people who are overweight, if they don't exercise, if they don't eat well, if they don't have a proper attitude and disposition, they have no gratitude in their life, they're unkind, they're selfish. These are all results of chronic thought patterns, which end up with a lack of the ability to control oneself. And I think that's probably the best place to start for everybody.
Yeah, you were working on a project for a while called The Science of Self-Control. I'm not sure if you ever actually published that book. Maybe it just got folded into the
It
wellness
got
practice.
folded in. Yeah,
Yeah.
good memory you have. Yeah, so belief system topography, the science of self-control. So again, I mean, as somebody who's dealt with thousands and thousands of chiropractors and through them millions of patients, one of the things you realize early on is there's kind of two halves to the battle, right? One is knowing what the right choice is, learning what the right choice is. In other words, what are healthy foods to eat? What kind of movement patterns are important? What kind of thought patterns? That's the easy half of the battle, I call it. The hard half of the battle is to actually consistently act in a way that's congruent with that knowledge, right? So knowing what to eat's easy. Getting yourselves to eat that way is hard. That's the hard half of the personal development or self-control battle. And so what you find out in practice is, and it doesn't matter what your practice is, if your practice is trying to help people do well in chiropractic school or in chiropractic profession, or trying to get patients to get well, it doesn't matter. What you'll find out is that if you're trying to influence another human being, then what you're going to realize is that what you tell them doesn't mean anything unless they do it. And one of the great struggles people have in practice, and one of the great myths I hear is, oh, people don't care about their health, they don't want to change. And that's absolutely not true. It's a self-defeating and it's incorrect. People do want to change, they don't know how. They don't know how to develop the self-control to change. But if you say to people, if you only had to clap your hands twice and you'd enjoy exercise and crave healthy food and you'd eat better and you'd look better and you'd be more physically fit and you'd be healthier, would you do it if you only had to clap your hands twice? Everybody would do it. So it's not that they don't desire a better life. It's that they don't believe they can achieve it. And why would they be able to achieve it if they don't have the tools and the skill set required to do so, right? So I think that's a big part of it. So, and you need a psychological fitness plan. That's how I describe it. You need the ability to develop this psychological fitness so that you have self-control. That's key to everything.
Yeah, I remember you in the classroom helping us sort of write out our own affirmations of the type of mindset that we would have to have, the belief system we would have to make the proper choices that we know we should be making. Like, we know that we should eat the apple, not the donut, but yet we still choose the donut. And the science of self-control was really about you deconstructing the actual process to change your mindset, right? I mean, there is to borrow your words, evidence-based protocol that a person can go through to change their mindset. So anyway, just as we keep moving and keep building context for you of what I'm up to with this pre-chiro program, I'm broken Nate up into your inner state, which is your scientist, thinker, artist, teacher, entrepreneur. And the scientist piece was one thing that I was really wanting to go deep with you of, like, becoming a chiropractic oriented scientist, and like how that's different from becoming a medically oriented scientist, and if we had science project fairs on college campuses, whether it was a chiropractic college campus or an undergraduate. I'm just curious, what are the types of projects that you could envision seeing in these fairs, or the types of prompts maybe that students can go and explore, like as part of an independent study project where they go and investigate things that are related to chiropractic, just like you did, I imagine, when you put together these different books, right?
Yeah, I think if you think as a biologist rather than a medical pathologist, everything's different. Biologists never look like if a species was going, getting sick or going, becoming endangered. Like remember when the Great Lakes all started to die off, and so all the greatest biologists kind of in the world kind of got together, and this is what happens whenever an ecosystem starts to die, right? We get together and we think, what can we do? But no scientist, no biologist on Earth would ever have said the reason those fish are dying or washing up on the shore with cancerous tumors is because of bad genes, or because the fish just have lost the ability to self-regulate their own immune systems, and you get it, right? And so they would always go, well, where's the source of toxicity and deficiency that is occurring to make these animals that are genetically designed to express healthy structure and function? That's what they've been naturally selected for over millennia, just like humans, right? So genes don't get worse over time, they get better through natural selection. That's the first biological law. I mean, it's 101. So I would say learn about ecosystems and biology, and then understand that humans are an ecosystem. And when you understand that, you see the nonsensical approach of modern medicine, right? Not modern emergency medicine when you get run over by a car, that makes sense, right? But the idea of dealing with chronic health and well-being or prevention, what you realize is they have no chance of success, and they're doing an enormous amount of harm. And they're teaching people that they're weak and defective. That's the underlying message, is that there's something wrong with you. You need a pill. And so it's really devastating in a lot of different ways. But I think the most important thing that anybody could learn if they want to become a chiropractor in terms of science is understand biology, understand how we study every other species and what makes other species healthy or sick, and then understand that humans are governed by the exact same biological laws as every other mammal. But yet we treat ourselves as if we're somehow different. There's restaurants that say no animals allowed, and it's full of humans. It makes no sense, right? Or we'll say, a virus jumped from animals to humans. Humans are animals. That's not a jump from animals to humans. Humans are animals. It's just everything we've been taught about. And it's because there's been a dominant paradigm, which is this allopathic paradigm that says people are sick because they're defective. That's not true. People are sick because we have defective choices, and humans have created a defective environment to live in.
Yeah, I could imagine this would be, it would require some confidence, some certainty, some clarity in the students that are starting their own pre-chiro clubs on these college campuses, and really contrasting the way of thinking between them and the pre-medical clubs or the pre-dental clubs.
Sure.
But I think that's inherent. The opportunity is right there, I think, to like create a nice divide in, or contrast, shall we say, in how we think differently, how we are truly like thinking through, like you said, innate energy expenditures, like what is the movement profile that we've been designed to over millennia to express, and what are college students currently expressing the opposite. Or I remember reading the average person back in the day in the hunter-gatherer years is like equivalent of an Olympic athlete today. So
Right.
just
Olympic decathlete.
Huh?
Olympic decathlete on average. Yeah.
On average. So like, how do we translate these recognitions that you've brought forth with literature through pre-chiropractic clubs, where they're studying the works that you've brought forth from different scientific peer-reviewed literature, and also just the books that you've created are like really holding of the hand and walking through them step by step, all the different advancements, developments, discoveries of the last 30, 50 years. So it's like these are literally like designed for a student to understand where we've come from and where we're at. What's possible if we have pre-chiro clubs using these books that you've created? And maybe you could just touch on what the inspiration for those books were, and what they are and what they've become, and how they've influenced the profession.
Sure. Well, I'll divide my books into two categories. One is the series of 4 books I created because I created the evidence-based chiropractic and lifestyle program through the ICA, where they would come. And so I had a book on the evidence for chiropractic. Then I had one on nutrition, one on movement and exercise, and and the body mind connection. And then I had one on thinking well, which is mind body connection and gut. But then I've also, I mean, I'm not trying to sell a book here, but I've also, this is the best book in terms of if you wanted one book to be able to start a club around and just have all the literature and all the references available. I mean, that's the best book to understand, to answer the question, which I started out with a very simple question, because everything only starts with the right question. And the question I had was, why are humans so sick? And then what is then required to get and keep humans well? And that should be the only question that matters in healthcare, right? And so what I realized was I couldn't answer the second question properly, what is required to get and keep humans well or prevent them from getting sick in the first place, unless I understood the cause of why they were sick. I had to address the cause. I had to find out why humans are sick. And that is where fundamentally allopathy, physical therapy, naturopathy, which is just natural allopathy, where they divide from chiropractic, because chiropractic has it right from the beginning that chiropractic says, when the question is, why are humans so sick? Allopathy says bad genes, inability to self-regulate, bad luck, bad germs. Chiropractors say, no, we're innately healthy. We're genetically like every other species on Earth. Now, remember, a biologist agrees with the chiropractic paradigm. We didn't make this paradigm up. We are just the first ones to adopt it into a healthcare model. But we didn't create the biological paradigm. It was there long before a chiropractor came along. But in the biological paradigm, they totally disagree with the medical paradigm. Medicine says living things are sick. Human animals, mammals are sick because of bad genes and inability to self-regulate. Biology says no chance. That's never where we look. Never. Medicine says because they can't self-regulate and because they're genetically weak, we have to give them drugs in order to save them. In biology, we've never given drugs or surgery or radiation to a species that's sick. We've always realized we had to protect its habitat so that it could eat, move, and think in ways that are genetically congruent. So I don't want chiropractors to think that somehow they're different in terms of medicine's over here and we're over here by ourselves. No, medicine's over here by themselves. The entire field of biology, biochemistry, physiology is on our side. We've just adapted into a healthcare model and nobody else has. And we don't sell drugs, so we get attacked. But the fact of the matter is, the paradigm that we're talking about is correct. Not maybe. It's 100% provably correct. And so I think, if that doesn't resonate with people, it's very hard to be an allopathic chiropractor and feel good about yourself. Because if you're competing against, trying to lower blood pressure with a drug or trying to lower cholesterol with a drug or all these other, I mean, drugs can affect physiology. There's no doubt. They just don't make people healthy. They just die with a lower blood pressure count or a lower blood cholesterol count. But in terms of if you think the entire goal is to change blood pressure, or cholesterol or blood sugar or whatever with a drug, if drug-induced homeostasis is what you think is a health goal, how are you going to compete against that as a chiropractor? You can't, right? But however, if you understand the biological paradigm, you realize we have to change habitat and lifestyle choices within that habitat to make sure that they're matching the genome of that species. Well, then what you'll see is all of these things that have shifted over into an allostatic allostasis, stress-induced change in the homeostatic parameters in the body, which they have to do as an adaptation to these stressors. Once you remove those stressors and put something back in its to eat, move, and think in ways that are genetically congruent, well, what do you see with blood pressure and cholesterol and blood sugar and body weight and moods? They all start to return to homeostasis. So if you don't get that, I would say that chiropractic is going to be a struggle, because you're going to feel inferior and you're going to feel somehow like you're an outlier, but it's not true. Medicine's the outlier. The entire field of biology agrees with us. Evolution agrees with us. Everything agrees with us, right?
I'm
Creation,
curious. I'm
evolution,
curious if
everything.
you could. I'm with you, brother. I'm just curious if you could paint a picture of how this recognition of the natural way is applied in a clinical practice. What does the wellness practice, the wellness lifestyle model look like? This clinical application through a healthcare model look like when you have this clarity about how to answer those two questions: Why are humans so sick, and what would it take to make them healthy?
Right. Well, two ways I always describe it are fun. Well, three ways: fun, easy, and profitable. And so those are three things I've always wanted to have in my life, right? And so I figured out how to accomplish them because I looked at the variables. So, but what that means is, in order for me to be successful and have fun and make it easy, make it profitable, is that patients have to come on board. And so you have to have ways to educate these patients. But I don't do it one on one because you know, in an adjustment, you've got to, you know, I think it's a 5-minute window basically, right? Because that's how long it takes, really. And the rest of the time, I don't know what you'd be doing, but anyway. So so the idea is that once you understand that everybody you're dealing with is a member of the same species. So that means that everything that in terms of the essential nutrients they need, in terms of how much exercise they need, in terms of the type of social connection and self-esteem they need, are all identical because we all have the same genome. That's how it works, right? If you understand biology, that's not controversial, right? Giraffes all eat giraffe diet, right? You know, polar bears eat the polar bear diet. You get me? Humans eat the human diet. So it's really simple once the eyes are open. So I already know two things about people. Well, number one is I know what they need, and I also know they're living in a very similar industrial habitat. So I know what their deficiencies are. They're very common. Everybody has what I call the rocks in the backpack, right? These things that are sinking them in the water, making life a struggle, and making them having to adapt their physiology and increase their stress hormone levels and get sympathetic dominance and get all these, you know, chronic precursors to chronic illness and then chronic illnesses, they fatigue. People have very similar common rocks in their backpack, and because they live in a similar habitat and they have similar choice options. So it's really easy to deal with everybody the same. I can get 90% of people 90% better 90% of the time in 90 days. And then there'll be a few like difficult ones at the end. But for the vast majority of people, they're all suffering from the same problem. They don't have enough vitamin D. They don't have enough omega-3. They don't have any probiotics. They're missing the micronutrients, the phytochemicals. They don't exercise. They're very deficient in exercise and clean water. They're very deficient in gratitude. Um, you know, so there's really some basic, really simple things that you can teach every patient with a handout or on a website that you don't have to spend a lot of time, but you can teach them as you're adjusting about why it's so important for them to do that and why lifestyle is the single most important determinant of their health. That's the key because they've been taught if they got bad genes or they're bad luck or inability to self-regulate. So once they get that biological paradigm that I just talked to you about, which doesn't take long, they're on board because they're like, that makes total sense. What the heck? That makes total sense. And then I always tell them, go think of a wilting plant, right? If you had a wilting plant, would you go, that plant must be genetically defective? Or would you go, oh no, that plant's probably missing something, right? And I go, exactly. That's what, same with humans, right? Anything that's alive that's not well is either deficient in something that it needs or it's having something toxic put into it. So I always say to people, what's the first thing you do if you had a wilting plant? And they go, well, I'd add water. I go, right. What if you added water and it's still wilting? Would you assume that water is no good for plants, or would you assume that maybe there's something else missing? And they're like, oh yeah, must be something else missing. I'll go, right. Maybe it doesn't have enough sunlight. Oh yeah, right, sunlight. And I go, maybe it doesn't have enough nutrients in the soil. Oh yeah, that's right. And I said, well, what if you got all those things that are still wilting? Oh, maybe someone's dumping poison and it's making the plant sick. A toxicity. I'm like, oh yeah. And I said, so how would that plant ever be well if it didn't have enough water, enough sunlight, enough nutrients in the soil, and nothing toxic being put into it at the same time for long enough time that it could heal? And they're like, that makes total sense. I said, well, that's what I do. So I'm gonna deal with that with you. I'm gonna give you the stuff you can do at home. You'll either do it or you won't. It's up to you. I'm not gonna nag you. It's up to you. I just want you to understand how important it is, and what I can help you with is the strategy of adding positives first instead of trying to take away the negative. So the negative things we have in our life are generally because there are sources of pleasure. So you don't want to take those away from patients first. I love pizza. Well, if you tell someone to stop eating pizza, that's one little bit of pleasure they have in their life. So I always add positive things first in a way that's so easy that they're comfortable doing it and they're sure they can accomplish it. And then we gradually change. So they develop self-control, they develop, some health. I always address the essential nutrients with my essential nutrient system first because that's easy. It takes them a couple seconds. It's not expensive, but what an enormous change it makes. So I always just get people to float downstream towards better health instead of swimming up against the current. If they think it's a swim against the current, they'll probably not do it.
Can we just pivot for a moment to the actual neurology and neuroscience of chiropractic and epigenetics and a salutogenic model and how it influences allostatic load and just the premises that you were able to come up with about chiropractic and kind of build for a student this understanding and structure in their mind of the value that chiropractic can have for people?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say that there's nothing that I've found that's unique. I found it in the literature. It's already there. So the only way to understand, in my view, the only way to understand chiropractic, first of all, you need the ecosystem model, right? You need to understand that we're a mind body and that everything's connected and that we're an ecosystem. Start there. Once you've got there, and again, that's not uniquely chiropractic, that's biology. So the next thing is that in order to understand chiropractic's impact or potential impact on a human experience is you have to understand the importance of movement, right? So when you understand the importance of joint movement and proprioceptive input into the central nervous system and the importance of movement to the actual physical structure of the bone, of the tendon, of the ligament, of the muscle, when you understand the importance of movement to the health of that joint, right? And sort of, if I can get it in there, if that joint's not moving properly, correct? What happens? Well, the part of the brain that controls that starts to degenerate. Every muscle that crosses that joint, the vessels that feed it with blood flow, the nerves that feed it, the connective tissue, the tendons, the ligaments, all the receptors in there, everything starts to die if it doesn't move. We need movement for that to be alive properly. It degenerates immediately. Olympic athletes, one day of bed rest, we can start to see changes, not just in their joints and muscles that aren't moving, but we can see them moving towards insulin resistance in one day. So movement is everything for the human experience. We have evolved around movement, right? Everything we do, movement is the most important thing because it gets us towards food and away from danger. So without the ability to move properly, there is no existence for humans. And that's how we're evolved. That's why most of our entire spinal cord is for feeding information from movement to the brain. It's that important. So if that thing's not moving, and this is starting the areas that in the sensory motor cortex and other areas that are fed by that, including some of the affect or emotional areas and the concentration areas, hippocampus, through the cerebellum and the amygdala, locus coeruleus, hypothalamus, all that stuff. If that's not moving properly, what's the only way to get it moving? Especially if it's in your spine. A drug, surgery, some kind of passive physical therapy modality like IFC or laser or anything else. Anything going to get that moving? Nope. There's only one way to restore that motion. And that's what we do, a rapid thrust, right? A rapid thrust makes a big difference in terms of the neurological firing, but it also makes a difference in terms of breaking up that scar tissue, especially in the spinal joints, but any joint. And so that reestablishes the neurological connection, and then it reestablishes, the sensory motor cortex and the motor control, but it also fires off the other areas of the brain that movement's so important for, like emotional regulation, autonomic balance. It's once you understand the what happens when a joint doesn't move, right? The nociception goes in, which is a stressor. And now we start to produce more cortisol and all the other things. Whether you're consciously aware of it or not, whether it's consciously painful or not, we need movement. The reason why sitting is the new smoking is not because sitting is a lack of aerobic exercise and increased heart rate. You can get up and move around with yoga without raising your heart rate or Tai Chi, and you'll still get the benefit. It's the neurology from movement that's so important. So what chiropractors do is they restore movement. So it has an enormous impact on the peripheral stuff, but it has an enormous impact. If you can trace movement into the central nervous system, you'll see the impact of chiropractic. If you can trace nociception from a joint into you can see the effect of subluxation, right? So subluxation is a lack of movement stimulation and too much nociceptive stress stimulation. And so an adjustment through movement restores that. So the way to explain the importance of chiropractic is to explain the importance of segmental joint movement. I call it a segmental motion unit because it's a motion unit, which is the old safety pin cycle from the old chiropractors, right? It's a complete unit. So I think once you get that,
Right, segmental motion deficiency syndrome, maybe.
yeah,
What I remember I remember reading that in a book some day ago. I'm just curious with all these exercise physiology labs and undergraduate institutions. Let's say that book that you just pulled up and held out and said this is a great starting point, or maybe this is the path for a prospective chiropractic student or a current chiropractic student. How would you recommend they go through that book? What are some maybe structure that you could create for them to work on that book together as they move through it? And then also, can we see translations of these recognitions of like how an adjustment influences the central nervous system showing up in exercise physiology labs and undergraduate institutions? Because I'm sure that there's tons of funding in those schools and there's tons of projects going on, but there's nothing really touching on the connections between chiropractic and movement. And obviously kinesiology is one of the hottest majors in the world right now.
yeah. What's interesting is there is an awful lot of work being published on the importance of exercise for immune function during COVID. You look at that, right? There's all kinds of stuff on for learning. Moods. Spark by Ratey, the book Spark by Ratey is incredibly talks about it. It's in fact, if you look at, you compare exercise to antidepressants, exercise is better. So there is this huge recognition of the importance of movement. It's just they're not correlating or making the connection between chiropractic and movement, because we've either taught them that chiropractic's either about back pain or chiropractic's about some kind of releasing some kind of life force. We haven't explained it in a way that could allow people to make a connection between, wow, if movement's that important and we can lose proper movement and it can be restored, wow, would that ever be huge? Because it's really common sense. It's self-evident once you make the connection. So a lot of people are making the connection between the importance of movement and the human experience, a quality human experience and longevity. And a lot of people have made a connection between chiropractic and movement, but there hasn't been this yet. And I think that's a lot of reason is because there's a bias against chiropractic, no doubt, but also there's just not enough chiropractors explaining it in a way that other people can make the connection. If you ask people to explain chiropractic, you don't often get a very evidence-based, rational explanation, unfortunately. And so, in terms of how they use the book, I've written the book in a way that you should just go through it in order, because it's put out in a way that it's kind of once you learn this, then this, then you know enough to understand this, and then so it is written that way. So it's quite easy to go through from start to finish. The other thing I've done recently is I put a lot of my lectures online. So if they go to the wellnesspractice.com or innatechoice.com, they go to the same place. They can actually now get my lectures recorded online. And so that just last month that I started this, and the reason is because I'm teaching some classes for the Chiropractic College in Barcelona, and I can't get there obviously. And so I'm basically putting all the modules that that you've gone through, it's all online now, all recorded in 1 hour segments. And so, that's all updated. So that's a really great way to go through it too.
No, that's amazing. And I'm just curious, as we segue to the end of this conversation, if you could maybe just touch on why you've continued doing it year after year after year, like what's kept that spark for you. And if you have any visions for maybe this rational, logical explanation of chiropractic coming from new places like an undergraduate student or a high school student, and finding its way up to the higher ups in these college campuses or high school campuses to value chiropractic more. And I think it needs to come from the inside out, just as a metaphor for people saying the first subluxation happens at birth with birth trauma or preconception, even with the lifestyle choices that mom was making. I heard you say babies are being born with insulin resistance. This pre-chiropractic year this pre-chiropractic time is really valuable. I don't think it's ever really been shown much acknowledgement or awareness, and I think it holds a huge potential. I'm just curious though, what is your vision for the future if you were to peer out and see more people applying the work that you've brought to the profession and building on top of it?
Yeah, I think my vision is that I would really like every chiropractor and every prospective student to very quickly learn how much evidence there is for chiropractic, both clinically. So chiropractors have always been really good at producing results, right? As Chris Kent used to say, we get the presents under the tree, right? But our explanation for how they got there is equivalent to Santa did it, right? It just, a lot of it doesn't make sense. So unfortunately, although our results have always been good, our explanations of how we get those results and what, and have not always been great. And also, we just have a lot. I mean, if you just Google chiropractic, and see what you get, and if you look at, how, like, there's no standardization. And the reason there's no standardization, in my opinion, is because we haven't been presented with a very palatable, evidence-based, unifying explanation or theory, which is what I've tried to produce. That's what I've spent my lifetime trying to do for chiropractors. And I think I've done it. There are some people who are going to reject it because they just can't get away from the 1895 stuff. And I'm like, it is what it is. But the new generation is much more open, I think. And by the way, I would say thousands of chiropractors who have, traditional subluxation-based chiropractors really enjoy seeing the evidence for what it is they do, like the vast majority, right? But I think so, and even why I agreed to teach these courses in Barcelona is because if chiropractors don't graduate with the ability to explain A, the level of clinical evidence for chiropractic in the literature, and B, how to explain why chiropractic works. If every chiropractor doesn't have a standardized, evidence-based approach on those two things, we'll never be a profession as we should, right? We'll always be divided. There'll always be arguing. We'll always feel inferior. We'll always have a lack of certainty. We'll always be easy targets. We'll always be posting silly stuff online that allows our detractors to attack that straw man rather than the true argument about chiropractic. And I also think what it does is when you put it in the terms that we were talking about today, it allows everybody to come together. Like, chiropractic should be an adjustment-centric, lifestyle-supported profession, right? Now, to what degree you want to talk about lifestyle in your practice, that's up to you. But you got to mention about how important it is for people to do on their own, at least, right? That's fair. And at the very least, everybody, the focus, the most evidence-based intervention that we have by a country mile is the chiropractic adjustment. So I think if we could find the commonality of that, and people would understand the lack of evidence for things that they're moving towards, like modalities and all these other things that might be more popular or socially acceptable, but they have way less evidence and therefore way less chance of actually helping a sick person get well and stay well. I think that will go a long way. But we need, in order to have a standardized, unified profession, we need to have a standardized, unified understanding of the level of evidence for what we do, where we lack evidence, where we have a preponderance of evidence, and where we're the gold standard, and a reasonable, simple explanation of why we are effective, like what happens when people get adjusted. And if you explain it through movement, as I've done briefly here, it's palatable to everybody because it's defensible, right? Some chiropractors think it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, as long as they can get their patients to come in and pay. And so if they explain it with a bone out of place, pressure on a nerve, garden hose, or whatever they want to do, they don't care because they say, well, they're getting adjusted anyway, so good for them. And I can actually sympathize with that in a way, because as long as people are getting adjusted, that's the intervention. The explanation is not an intervention, right? That doesn't do anything for people. It's the adjustment that has the therapeutic benefit. However, if you go to 10 different chiropractors and get 10 different explanations and completely 10 different care protocols and everything else, it's very difficult for us to portray ourselves as a profession.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with any students out there. I mentioned your name a lot, and now to have some video of you breaking down some of your core concepts is really valuable for the future of the profession. I think that any prospective student, no matter what school they go to, if they get exposed to the work that you've done and they can build, as you say, an argument that's defensible, it's not really going to matter what chiropractic school they go to. They're going to have clarity over what chiropractic is, what it isn't. They're going to have explored the literature, and they will have come to their own conclusions, their own truths, not because you told them, but because they were able to sit with certain questions and explore those questions with you and the work that you've done. So anyway, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Chestnut.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.